Welcome to the channel. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to click like and subscribe to stay updated with our latest content. Your support helps us create more awesome videos for you. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Enjoy the video. My wife Amy and I have been together for 6 years and married for almost a year. Our time together has been very normal. I've never seen any strange things from her. This whole thing is very odd for her. Amy is very nice, smart, and kind. She's always been a serious person. Being silly or trying to scare me is not something she'd do. She doesn't even like scary movies. When we first met, she watched The Bright Sun with me because I love horror. She was so scared that she couldn't finish it. We had to turn it off. She isn't into anything scary and has never liked jokes. It's just not for her. And that's okay. But that's what was so weird about this. It's just so different. She also never had any mind problems, and I don't think it's in her family. I know some people can hide those problems, but in 6 years, I think I'd have seen something. 2 months ago, I was in the kitchen making coffee before work. I was late and knew I wouldn't get my usual coffee. I took a drink as I walked to the front door. Then I saw Amy looking at me from around the corner. I could only see her eyes and some of her dark hair. The rest of her was hidden. I almost dropped my coffee. I did burn my mouth. "Geez, Amy," I said, cleaning my pants. "You scared me." She quickly hid like a small child. I heard her run to the living room. By the time I got to the door, she was gone. It was really weird and not like her, but I also thought it was funny that she was playing. I yelled that I loved her and called her silly. As I closed the door, I heard her laugh. It was odd, but not a big deal. I forgot about it by lunch. When I got home, she was normal. I didn't say anything, and neither did she. Life went on. The next thing happened 3 days later. It was around 2 a.m., and I woke up for a drink. I was at the kitchen table, holding juice, when I felt like someone was watching me. I looked down and saw my wife's smiling face. She was looking at me from the other side of the table, staring up with wide eyes and a big smile. Like a cat. I screamed. I was scared. When I screamed, Amy crawled back quickly. Her hands and feet hit the floor as she went out of the kitchen. I didn't chase her or yell. I just stood there, shocked, wondering what made her do that. It took me a while to go back upstairs. When I got to our room, Amy was on her side, asleep, or acting like it. I watched her breathe to make sure she was really sleeping. I thought she might jump out when I got in bed. But she didn't. I got in, and she didn't move. Her breathing was soft, and I started to think I dreamed it. The next morning, I waited for her to come down for coffee. I gave her a cup, kissed her, and asked about it. "What was that last night?" I asked, keeping my voice light. She looked confused, shaking her head. "You were looking at me again. From over there," I said, pointing to the floor by the table. She looked, and when she looked back, she laughed. She laughed so hard that I laughed too. "You scare me sometimes," I said. She giggled, put her cup down, and hugged me. "You scare me all the time." "So we're even," she said. We said goodbye and left for work. I kept thinking about how creepy it was seeing her smile like that. The sounds her hands made on the floor. I told myself she was just being silly, trying to be like me with my love of scary things. It's not like I was afraid of her, but it still felt wrong. I started seeing her look at me more, sometimes from behind the sofa or curtains. Once she even got inside her grandma's old box at the end of our bed. I might not have known she was there, but the box's old hinges made noise. She had the lid up just enough to see half her face. She was smiling like a happy kid. It was scary. I didn't know what to say. I just stared. Finally, I asked her why she was doing this. She didn't answer, but she slowly closed the lid. I just walked away, feeling bad. I didn't know why, but it made her happy. I just hoped she would stop soon. Amy didn't look at me for 2 weeks. I thought she was done, and I was happy. We were watching a show one night, and I joked that I hadn't seen her looking at me, and that she must have quit her spy game. She looked at me with a small smile and said, "Maybe I'm just better at it." I didn't say anything, but I wondered if she was joking. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking, was she still looking at me and I just didn't see? And if so, why? I started to feel worried, always checking if she was watching. I was jumpy when I was home and she wasn't near. I felt silly and a little crazy. But after a few weeks with nothing, I relaxed. I stopped checking and told myself it was just a bad memory. Then a few days ago, things got much worse. Amy went to a friend's and I played games on my computer. Around 9 p.m., I took a shower. As I was washing my hair, I felt that bad feeling of being watched. I slowly opened my eyes and almost had a heart problem. Amy was looking from behind the shower curtain, her head in the shower, her body outside. Her dark hair was wet, her mouth was open in a bad smile, eyes wide and red. I screamed and jumped back. She didn't move and her smile didn't change. Her makeup ran down her face. She looked happy and crazy. I was very scared. We stood like that for a while, not saying anything. Finally, she slowly pulled her head back. I watched her blurry shape through the curtain as she went to the door. A second later, the door slammed hard. I screamed again and jumped out to lock the door. I stayed in the bathroom for over an hour. Maybe I was overreacting, but joke or not, I wasn't going to deal with it anymore. That's what I told myself as I walked around, listening at the door. Suddenly, I heard a quiet sound. I put my ear to the door. I couldn't hear anything, but I pictured Amy on the other side, giggling. I felt angry. I was mad at being scared in my own house, hiding in the bathroom. All for what? A joke? It was a bad joke. "What the heck, Amy?" I yelled. "This is annoying." I waited for her to say sorry or call me names, but instead I heard a faint moan, so quiet I wasn't sure, and then nothing. "Amy?" I called, my voice shaky. No answer, just my breathing. "Stop it," I yelled, hitting the door. I waited for her to yell at me. I have never screamed at her before, but there was nothing, just the water dripping. I was scared, too afraid to open the door. I waited another 30 minutes, which feels like forever when you're scared. Finally, I got on my knees and looked under the door. I thought I'd see her face, but I didn't. I could see down the hall, but no Amy. I didn't know if I should be happy or not. I looked for a few minutes, waiting to see her head, but it never came. I stood up, my hand on the door, ready to open it. I slowly turned the lock and was about to open it when I heard a sound that still makes me sick. A moan, louder, but this time I knew where it came from. I turned my head to the closet door and saw my wife looking at me from the small opening. Her eyes were wide and her mouth was open in the worst smile I'd ever seen. I didn't scream. I was too scared. Her hands were at her chest, shaking with excitement. A short, rough moan came from her throat, making me shiver. Somehow, I opened the door and ran down the stairs, grabbing my keys and phone before running to my car. I could hear her high-pitched laugh, but I didn't hear her getting closer. I didn't close the front door. I drove away fast, shaking from fear or cold. Maybe both. I didn't have a coat or shoes. I was still in my underwear, and my hair was wet. I drove to my brother Joe's house about 40 minutes away, ignoring calls and texts. I didn't check my phone until I was in his driveway. Amy had called 4 times and sent many texts, all asking where I was and why I left. I threw my phone, mad at her calm attitude. My brother and his wife were surprised to see me in just underwear but told me to stay. Joe gave me clothes and asked what happened. I said Amy and I had a fight, but didn't say more. I didn't want him to think I was overreacting, leaving my wife over a joke, even a weird one. I mean, I had told her for years to be less serious. I wanted her to relax, but this was not what I meant. I tried to sleep on their sofa, but my brain wouldn't let me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Amy's face. Knowing she was in there with me made me feel sick. She never left the bathroom. She hid in the closet and slammed the door to trick me. Just thinking of going home made me worried. I tossed and turned. Joe gave me a sleeping pill, so I got some rest. My sleep was full of bad dreams. All of Amy's smiling face. I woke up as the sun rose. My body ached, and I felt tired. I knew I'd have to call Amy, but I didn't know what to say. I wouldn't go home unless she promised to stop the creepy stuff. I just wanted my wife back. Her normal, serious self never looked so good. I was thinking about calling her when I felt it again. I was being watched. I was staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding. I didn't want to look away, but it got worse. My eyes moved on their own. Her face was against the window, looking down at me with that same smile. Drool ran down her lips, making streaks on the glass. I didn't know how long she'd been there, but I felt like it was a long time, maybe all night. I didn't scream, though I was afraid. Anger was stronger. I jumped up and hit the glass. "Amy, are you crazy? What's wrong with you? Go home," I shouted. Now, she didn't move and her bad expression didn't change. If anything, her smile grew, like she was very happy. I could hear Joe and his wife Sarah upstairs. As if Amy could hear them, her head moved and she started to close her mouth slowly. Joe called my name, worried. I turned to see him and Sarah coming down. When I turned back to the window, Amy was gone. The only sign was the drool on the glass. I tried to tell Joe and Sarah about seeing Amy at the window. They didn't believe me, which is normal. Joe and I went outside, but there were no footprints, just a small mark. "Probably an animal," Joe said, and I didn't argue. He and Sarah thought I dreamed it, but they didn't understand. I was too tired to explain. I called out of work and turned off my phone. I didn't want to face Amy. Just talking to her was too much. I really started to think something was very wrong with her. That no matter what, we'd never be the same. That made me sad. I cried most of the morning. By noon, I thought I was ready to talk to her, give her one last chance. I could at least do that after 6 years, I told myself. I turned on my phone and saw the many texts, all from a worried wife. "Can we talk? I love you. Please call me. I'm worried. Can you answer? Just come home." And more like that. All saying she loved me and wanted me home. How worried she was. Not one about the crazy stuff she did. Like she hadn't been acting like someone from a scary book. Even her texts were different. She usually wrote long texts just to tell me to buy bread. You'd think she'd have more to say after her weird actions. I know it seems silly to some, but if you saw how Amy looked at me, how she crawled like an animal, smiling at me from the closet like a crazy person, then I think you'd understand. I stayed with Joe and Sarah another night. I didn't wake up until afternoon, and thankfully I didn't see Amy's face at the window. "I don't want to be nosy, but can this fight be fixed?" Sarah asked. She made us lunch, and I knew she wanted to talk about it. "I don't know. She's like a different person," I said, choosing my words. I still wasn't ready for her or Joe to know everything. "People change, Tom, but she's still the same woman you married. Maybe you just need to talk. Whatever's going on, I'm sure it can be fixed," she said, always the peacemaker. "I think it's more than that now. I don't think talking would help. I just don't trust her," I said. The words hurt. I missed and loved my wife, but how could I live with someone like that? Living scared didn't sound good. "Amy loves you. She must be very sad," she said. "I don't know about that," I said. "Well, she seemed like it to me. I've never seen her so upset. Very different from the Amy I know," Sarah said, shaking her head. It took a minute for her words to hit me, and when they did, I felt dread. "Wait, what do you mean? You saw her? You saw Amy?" I asked, my mouth dry. Sarah nodded, like it wasn't a scary thing. Maybe for her, it wasn't. "She stopped by this morning, just after Joe left for work," she said, cleaning the plates. "I didn't see her car, though. Maybe she took a ride or something." "Sarah, what did she say? Did she come inside?" I asked, sweating. I started looking around, checking corners. "No, she just asked if you were awake, and I said you weren't. I asked if she wanted me to wake you, but she said no. Just said to let you sleep," she said, washing dishes. That's all? She didn't say anything else? I asked. No. She looked bad, though, like she hadn't slept. I think you should call her. I got up and thanked Sarah for lunch. I felt a little better knowing she hadn't come inside. Still, I needed to check that the doors were locked. I sat for a while, trying to figure out what to do. I didn't want to go home, but I felt I owed it to Amy to help her. Hadn't I promised to love her in sickness and health? Clearly, she was sick. If she was sick, which I believed, I had to try and get her help. But I didn't know where to start. I didn't want to call the police, and what would I tell them? That my wife was looking at me? Being creepy? As weird as she hadn't done anything illegal. Not yet. The police would probably say I was overreacting. But this wasn't a joke. It felt wrong. Dangerous. Like something bad was under her smile. I knew, as her husband, I could have her put in a hospital, but what if she acted normal? She'd fooled Sarah. As long as the doctors didn't think she was a danger, they'd have to let her go after 72 hours. I felt lost, so I did what any husband would do. I called her mother. I didn't want to. Her mother, Mary, and I were never close. We'd never fought. She just wasn't a warm person and wasn't easy to get along with. She hardly smiled, and when she did, only her lips moved, leaving her eyes blank. She felt like she was always on guard. I'd only met her twice, and both times were short. I got the feeling she didn't like me for her daughter. Amy always rushed us out, so I wouldn't feel bad, which I was thankful for. Being near her mother felt hard, like walking on glass. I was glad when we moved far away so we didn't have to see her often. I was happy to avoid her, but I needed her help. I really didn't want to talk to her, but I had to talk to someone who knew Amy better, so I did what I had to. Yes, she answered, already sounding annoyed. Mary, it's me, Tom. Do you have a minute? I asked. I could hear her make an annoyed sound. I'm busy with bills, but if you must, I can spare a moment. What do you want, Tom? She said coldly. It's about Amy. She's been acting weird, and I wondered if you knew anything. I was cut off. It's hard to understand you, Tom. What do you want? She asked. I could almost see her in her sweater and pants, tapping her fingers on the table. I wanted to know if you'd ever seen any strange behavior, or maybe any mind problems, I asked. There was a long, quiet pause. I couldn't tell if she was thinking or something else. Finally, she spoke. If this is a joke, Tom, I don't think it's funny. Now, I have things to do, so if you don't mind, she said, but I stopped her. Mary, it's not a joke. I'm really worried about Amy's mind. She's been acting very strange. I'm worried, and I thought, as her mother, you would be too, I said, my frustration showing. If you're really worried, then get doctors involved. I don't know what you want from me, she snapped. I could tell she was about to hang up, and I didn't want her to. I felt like she knew more than she was saying. Please, if not for me, do it for Amy, I tried. I heard a shaky breath, like she was trying to stay calm but failing. Mary, what's wrong? I started. Tom, I don't know what to tell you. My only advice is to get help from doctors. Don't call here again. Goodbye. I tried to call out, but she hung up. I tried to understand the call and why she wouldn't help. Even if she didn't like me, why wouldn't she help her daughter? I couldn't get it. I replayed the conversation, trying to find something I missed. After a while, I almost gave up until I remembered her last words. Get help from doctors. She said those words with a bit of urgency. Maybe I was just hoping, but I was sure her voice changed slightly. Like they were important. What did she mean? I thought she meant medical doctors, but maybe she meant someone else. Someone she didn't feel comfortable saying directly. Or maybe I was just desperate. I waited for Joe to get home, and after a long talk with him and Sarah, I convinced them that Amy needed mental help. I didn't tell them everything. I wasn't ready, but I told them about our last meeting, how she hid in the bathroom looking at me from the closet. They were shocked, but thankfully, they believed me. They wanted to help. Still, they didn't think it was that serious. Weird, maybe, but not dangerous. They kept saying Amy must be playing a joke. YouTube, Sarah suggested, not really believing it. Joe didn't think we should call the police yet. He offered to go with me, and I agreed. He thought talking to her calmly, trying to get her to go willingly, was best. I agreed. At least I wouldn't be alone. We drove over this morning after breakfast. No way was I going at night. When we got there, my stomach felt sick. Her car wasn't there, but I still wasn't relaxed. The front door was open a little, and for a second I thought we'd see her eyes. I was shaking and sweating. Joe, however, was fine. He waited for me to open the door, his hands in his pockets like he was taking a walk. I wished I didn't know what was happening. I pushed the door open and was hit with a bad smell. Joe smelled it too and walked in behind me, pinching his nose. "What do you clean the floors with, poop?" Joe mumbled. "Shut up," I said, looking around for Amy. The house was very quiet and dark, even though it was 10 a.m. All the curtains were closed. If I hadn't left just 2 days ago, I'd have thought no one lived there. We moved through each room, checking any place she might hide, sometimes calling her name. "Why are you looking under the sofa?" Joe asked. "Aren't we looking for your wife?" He looked at me like I was stupid. "Let's just go upstairs," I whispered. He shook his head but followed me to check the bathroom and extra room. On the way up, my shoes crunched on glass on the stairs. I saw that one of Amy and my wedding pictures on the wall was broken. The frame was crooked, all the glass gone. I stared at the picture, a lump in my throat. We took it just after leaving the church. She looked so pretty in her white dress. I looked at Amy's beautiful face. I never thought her face would scare me. We climbed the rest of the stairs and checked the extra room, but it looked untouched. I was scared to go into the bathroom, my fear from that night coming back. Joe saw and offered to go in alone, but I couldn't let him. So we went in together, checking the closet and the shower. The bathroom looked like it hadn't been used since I left. "I don't think she's here, Tom. Pack some clothes and we'll come back tomorrow," Joe said. I nodded and went into our room and put clothes in a bag. When I checked inside our closet, I found where the smell was coming from and gagged. Joe took one look and went pale. He had to stand by the stairs to get away from the sight and smell. I looked down in shock at what was in my closet. Soaking into the rug were at least a dozen eyeballs, all in pairs. Some were big, some were small. I stared at the eyes she'd taken from small animals and wondered how she got them and felt scared thinking about it. Man, I thought I had it bad with Sarah's shoes. "But wow, your wife's collecting eyeballs," Joe said, gagging. "Tom, I think we should go," he called from the hall. "I feel sick." "All right." I grabbed my bag and shut the closet door on my new fear. I stepped out and took a deep breath. I could taste the bad smell and I gagged. "Who puts eyeballs in their closet like that?" Joe mumbled. "I tried to tell you she needed help," I said. "She doesn't need help, Tom. She needs a priest," he said. "Are you coming? I can't stand the smell." His words stopped and his eyes got big with fear. I didn't ask why. I could feel it. Someone was watching, and I didn't think it was the eyes in the closet. I turned around, slowly looking around the room. "Oh God," I whispered when I finally saw what we missed. Under the bed, curled up, watching us with the happiness of a kid at Christmas, was my wife. She held her hands under her chin, and they were shaking. Now that she knew we saw her, I could hear the quiet noises she was making, a kind of hiccup in her throat like she was too excited. It was very scary. Wide eyes and that same huge smile. Everything in me said to run, but I stopped it. This was my wife. No matter how strange, she was still the woman I married. I had to help her. "Amy," I said softly. She didn't answer, but her head moved back and forth quickly like she was nodding. "Honey, I just want to help, okay? Can you let me?" I asked. I took a step forward, going to her like she was a dangerous animal. "I love you, Amy," I said softly, taking another step. She let a tiny moan out, and I had to stop myself from running. Her shoulders were shaking, and her eyes got huge. I knelt down so I could see her better, and saw the blood. Her hands were covered in it. They shook more the closer I got, like she couldn't control herself. "Amy, are you hurt? You're bleeding," I said. She nodded, her bloody fingers moving up and down like playing a piano. They touched her chin, leaving blood. I wanted to pull back. The smell from her was terrible. I felt sick. Her lips were dry and stretched, blood between the cracks. I knew she wouldn't come out on her own, but I didn't want to leave her like that. I moved closer and reached out. The hiccuping sounds got louder, and her hands shook, fingers moving. Then I saw the blood coming from between her fingers. "Oh my God, Amy. You're bleeding," I said. I reached out to take her hand, but before I could touch her, her hand shot out. A sharp pain went through my arm, and I fell back. My arm burned, and I saw blood on the carpet. I looked back at her in shock and saw her smiling, her fingers holding a big piece of glass. "Are you okay in there?" Joe asked from behind me. I turned my head slightly and nodded, holding my arm. When I turned back to Amy, I saw she wasn't looking at me, and she wasn't smiling. She was staring past me, her eyes glaring at Joe like a hungry lion. Her mouth was still open, but it was twisted in anger. I got up and walked backward, afraid to take my eyes off her. "Are you bleeding?" Joe asked. The moment he said that, Amy started crawling fast from under the bed, the glass still in her hand. "Joe, run! Go!" I yelled. He must have been too scared to move because a second later I felt my back hit him. He was still at the top of the stairs, staring at my wife. Amy was out from under the bed and stood in the doorway, her face full of rage. Her whole body was tight. Blood ran down her fingers. "Jesus, Amy," Joe said, playing hide and seek. I reached back and pushed him towards the steps. "Move, Joe," I said as quietly but firmly as I could. Amy nodded fast and began to smile, stretching her mouth open so wide her chin seemed to touch her chest. I heard Joe say a prayer, and then he was running down the stairs. I stood at the top, stuck between love for a woman who needed help and wanting to save myself. "I only want to help," I said, holding back tears. Her eyes focused on me again as she slowly lifted the glass. And then she started running towards me, smiling with excitement. Thankfully, my body took over, and I flew down the stairs, skipping steps. I made it to the front door before I felt her jump on my back, wrapping her arms around my neck, her open mouth next to my ear so I could hear those terrible sounds. I shook her off, knocking her to the floor. I felt a pain in my back, but I opened the door and ran to my car. Joe was in the yard, talking to the police. I didn't say a word. I just ran to my car and jumped in. Joe followed, still on the phone with 911. I watched the mirror, sure I'd see her running after us, but I never did. I went straight to the hospital and got stitches in my arm and back. The police asked a lot of questions and went back to the house, but of course, Amy wasn't there. They told me to stay with a friend or family for a while and to get a restraining order. But none of that would matter. Somehow, I knew. I dropped Joe off and went to a motel an hour away. I wanted to be far from Amy. This is where I've been for the last 4 hours. I thought maybe the police would find her. Maybe they'd get her help. But now I don't think so. Because 40 minutes ago, I got a text from a number I didn't know. Just 3 words. "I found you," and a picture. The picture was dark, but I knew what it was. There was no mistaking my wife's eye. I started typing this immediately after. I don't know what to do. I'm alone and scared, and I can't help but feel that I'm being watched. I jumped up from the motel bed, heart pounding. I checked the peephole, then slowly opened the door, looking both ways down the dingy hallway. Empty. I stepped back inside, locking the door, the chain, and the deadbolt. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I stared at the picture again. Her eye was blurry, dark around the edges, but it was her. The color, the shape, even the few eyelashes visible were hers. A wave of nausea rolled over me. How? How had she found me? And whose eye was it? The police hadn't found any human remains. Just animal. Had she escalated? I started pacing, my mind racing. I had to think. The police were useless. Joe and Sarah were scared, but ultimately dismissive, thinking it was a prank gone too far. Mary, Amy's own mother, had practically hung up on me, warning me to seek professional help in that strange, urgent tone. What kind of professional help was she really talking about? The restraining order? Pointless. She'd already violated every unwritten rule of decency and sanity. A piece of paper wouldn't stop her. I needed to figure out what was wrong with her. This wasn't just weird anymore. This was monstrous. The eyeballs, the glass, the look in her eyes, it wasn't human. I thought back to our 6 years together. Truly normal. No hints, no clues. We had our disagreements, sure, but nothing major. She was Amy. Serious, yes, but kind, intelligent, loving. The woman in that picture, the woman under my bed, that wasn't Amy. Then it hit me, Mary's reaction. Her coldness, her refusal to help, her clipped, almost coded warning. And the way Amy always rushed us out of her mother's house. What was the relationship really like? What wasn't Amy telling me? I grabbed my phone again, ignoring the fresh wave of texts from the unknown number. They were all variations of the same message. I see you. Coming closer. Almost there. Each one sent a fresh jolt of terror through me. I found Mary's number and, with trembling fingers, dialed. It rang and rang and rang. Just as I was about to give up, she answered, her voice even colder than before. What? It wasn't a question. Mary, it's Tom again. I know you told me not to call, but it's about Amy. She's worse, much worse. Silence. I could hear her breathing, shallow and quick. I told you, she began, her voice tight. You told me to seek professional help, I interrupted, my voice rising. What kind of professional help, Mary? What aren't you telling me? What's wrong with my wife? There was a long pause, filled only with the crackle of the phone line. Then a whisper, so low I almost didn't hear it. It's not something doctors can fix, Tom. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? There are things in this world that science can't explain. Things that attach themselves to people. Change them. Attach themselves? I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. Like a possession? The word felt ridiculous, insane, even as I said it. But looking back at the picture on my phone, at the eye, at the memory of Amy's inhuman grin, it was the only thing that made any sense. I don't know what to call it, Mary said, her voice cracking, but it's been in our family for generations. We thought we'd broken the line. She was normal. We thought she was safe. Safe? Safe from what, Mary? Tell me. Another long silence. Then a sob. A real heartbroken sob. The first genuine emotion I'd ever heard from her. There's a man, they call him the collector. He deals with these things. He's the only one who can help. The collector, I repeated, my mind reeling. Who is he? Where do I find him? I don't know his real name. He moves around, but there's a place, an old bookstore in Oak Haven, the Whispering Pages. Ask for the book on shadows. They'll know. Oak Haven. It was hours away, but it was the only lead I had. Thank you, Mary, I said, my voice shaking. Thank you. I hung up, grabbed my keys, and ran out of the motel room, not even bothering to check out. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I just drove. As I drove, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see Amy's distorted face pressed against the back window. Every shadow seemed to move. Every flicker of light seemed to be her eyes. The texts kept coming, each one more chilling than the last. I smell your fear. Running won't help. We'll be together soon. I turned off my phone, but the images, the feeling of being watched, wouldn't go away. I was in a race against something I didn't understand, something that had stolen my wife and was now hunting me. And my only hope was a mysterious collector in a hidden bookstore and a book about shadows. The sun was setting as I finally reached Oak Haven. It was a small, quiet town, the kind of place that seemed to exist outside of time. The streets were mostly empty, the houses dark and silent. I found the Whispering Pages bookstore tucked away on a side street, its windows dusty and dim. A small, flickering light shone from within. I parked, took a deep breath, and walked inside. The bell above the door jingled, announcing my arrival. The air inside was thick with the scent of old paper and dust. Rows and rows of books lined the walls, reaching up to the high ceiling. It was eerily silent. A small, elderly woman with sharp eyes and a severe expression sat behind a counter, reading a large, leather-bound book. She looked up as I approached. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice surprisingly strong. I swallowed, my throat dry. "I'm looking for a book," I stammered. "A book on shadows." The woman's eyes narrowed. She didn't say anything, just stared at me, her gaze piercing. It felt like she was looking through me, seeing all my fear, all my desperation. Then, without a word, she closed her book, stood up, and beckoned me to follow. She led me through the labyrinthine aisles, deeper into the heart of the bookstore. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the creak of the floorboards under our feet and the faint rustle of turning pages, though I saw no one else in the store. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to deepen, clinging to the shelves like living things. Finally, she stopped before a section of books unlike the others. These were older, bound in dark leather and metal, their titles unreadable, obscured by age and dust. Some seemed to hum faintly, a low, vibrational thrum that resonated in my bones. The woman pointed to a particularly thick, black-bound volume. It had no title, no markings, just a smooth, obsidian surface that seemed to absorb the light around it. "This," she said, her voice a low whisper, "is what you seek. But be warned, knowledge of shadows comes at a price." I reached out, my hand trembling, and took the book. It was surprisingly heavy and cold to the touch. As soon as my fingers brushed the cover, a jolt of energy, like static electricity, shot up my arm. I almost dropped it. What is it?" I asked, my voice shaking. "It's a guide," the woman said. "A record of entities that exist beyond our perception. Things that feed on fear, on darkness, on the vulnerable. Like the thing that's with my wife?" I asked, the words catching in my throat. The woman nodded slowly. "Perhaps this book may tell you how to sever the connection, but it won't be easy, and it will be dangerous." "I have to try," I said, clutching the book tightly. "I have to get her back." The woman studied me for a long moment, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and something else, something that looked like understanding. "Then you'll need to find him," she said. "The collector. He's the only one who can truly help." "But where is he?" I asked, feeling a surge of desperation. "Her mother said he moves around." The woman reached beneath the counter and pulled out a small, tarnished silver compass. It was intricately engraved with symbols I didn't recognize. "This will guide you," she said, handing it to me. "But it only works when the need is great and when the shadows are close." I took the compass. It felt warm in my hand, almost alive. The needle spun wildly for a moment, then settled, pointing towards the back of the bookstore. He's here?" I asked, surprised. The woman shook her head. "Not yet, but he will be. The shadows are gathering. She is coming." At that moment, the lights in the bookstore flickered and died, plunging us into near-total darkness. The only light came from the faint glow of the compass in my hand. A cold wind swept through the store, rustling the pages of the books and carrying with it a faint, sickeningly sweet smell, the smell of rot. I heard a sound, a soft, slithering sound coming from the front of the store. And then, a giggle, a high-pitched, manic giggle that I knew all too well. "She's here," I whispered, my voice trembling. The woman nodded, her face grim. "Go," she said, pushing me gently towards a narrow door hidden behind a bookshelf. "Follow the compass. He'll be waiting." I didn't hesitate. I pushed open the door and slipped through, the compass guiding me into the darkness. Behind me, I heard the bookstore door crash open and Amy's laughter echo through the aisles. The door led to a narrow, winding alleyway behind the bookstore. The compass needle spun again, then pointed down the alley, away from the town. I ran, my lungs burning, the book clutched tightly in one hand, the compass in the other. The alley opened onto a deserted road, leading into a dark, dense forest. The compass needle pointed straight ahead, into the trees. I didn't slow down. I plunged into the woods, the branches scratching at my skin, the darkness closing in around me. I could hear her behind me, her movements fast and erratic, punctuated by that chilling giggle. She was toying with me, letting me run, savoring the chase. The forest grew thicker, the trees taller, their branches intertwined, blocking out the moonlight. The only light came from the compass, its silver surface glowing faintly, guiding me through the darkness. After what felt like hours, the compass needle began to spin again, then settled, pointing towards a small clearing ahead. In the center of the clearing stood a figure, silhouetted against the faint light filtering through the trees. He was tall and thin, dressed in a long, dark coat that seemed to blend with the shadows. He held a lantern in one hand, its light casting an eerie glow on his face. He had sharp features, a hawk-like nose, and eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. As I approached, he raised his head, his gaze meeting mine. "You seek to banish the shadow," he said, his voice deep and resonant. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said, my voice hoarse. "My wife, she's not herself." The collector nodded slowly. "I know. I've been expecting you." He gestured to the book in my hand. "You have the knowledge, but knowledge alone is not enough. You need tools." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. He opened it, revealing a collection of objects. A silver knife, a vial of clear liquid, a handful of dried herbs, and a small, intricately carved wooden box. "These will aid you," he said. "But the most important tool is your will, your love for her. That is the only thing that can truly break the connection." He explained what I needed to do, his words precise and chilling. It was a ritual, a dangerous and desperate attempt to sever the link between Amy and whatever had taken hold of her. As he spoke, the sounds of the forest grew louder, the rustling of leaves, the snapping of twigs, the chilling giggle. Closer now, much closer. "She's here," the collector said, his eyes fixed on the edge of the clearing. "Be ready, and remember, do not hesitate. Doubt is their greatest weapon." I took a deep breath, my heart pounding, and nodded. I was ready, or at least I had to be. And then she stepped into the clearing. She moved with an unnatural grace, her limbs fluid and almost serpentine. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her hair a tangled mess, matted with what I prayed was mud and not something worse. But it was her face that truly froze me in place. Her eyes, once the warm brown I loved, were now wide and black, reflecting the lantern light like a predator's. Her smile, once comforting, was stretched impossibly wide, revealing too many teeth sharpened to points. Drool and blood mixed on her chin, dripping onto her torn shirt. The shard of glass, now stained a dark, rusty crimson, was clutched tightly in her hand. She didn't speak, but that hiccuping, gurgling sound emanated from her throat, a constant, unsettling rhythm. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated glee. "Amy," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Please, it's me." She tilted her head, the movement jerky and unnatural, like a broken doll. The smile widened, if that were even possible, stretching the skin at the corners of her mouth until it seemed ready to tear. The collector stepped forward, placing himself between me and Amy. He raised the lantern, its light casting dancing shadows on the trees. "Leave her," he said, his voice firm and commanding. "She is not yours to take." Amy, or rather the thing inhabiting Amy, hissed, a sound like air escaping a punctured tire. She took a step forward, the glass shard glinting in the lantern light. "Now, Tom," the collector shouted. "Begin." I fumbled with the pouch, my hands shaking so badly I could barely open it. I pulled out the silver knife, its blade gleaming coldly. According to the collector, I needed to draw a circle around myself, a barrier of protection. I started to scrape the blade across the ground, the sound grating against the silence of the forest. Amy watched me, her head cocked, that horrible smile still plastered on her face. The hiccuping sound grew louder, faster. As I completed the circle, I pulled out the vial of clear liquid. The collector had called it purified water, blessed by someone or something. I uncorked it and sprinkled the water around the circle, the droplets hissing as they hit the ground. Next, the herbs. A pungent, almost acrid smell filled the air as I scattered them around the circle's edge. They sparked faintly, tiny embers of blue light flickering and dying. Amy was getting closer, circling the edge of my protective barrier, her eyes fixed on me, that terrifying grin never wavering. She tested the circle, tentatively extending a finger, then quickly withdrawing it with a hiss as it touched the boundary. The collector chanted in a low, guttural language I didn't understand. The words seemed to vibrate in the air, creating a palpable tension. He held the lantern high, its light flickering wildly. Now, the hardest part. The wooden box. Inside, according to the collector, was a small polished piece of obsidian, a shadow mirror. I was to hold it up to Amy, forcing the entity to see its own reflection, to confront its own darkness. I opened the box, my hands trembling so violently I almost dropped it. The obsidian mirror was smooth and cool to the touch. I held it up, aiming it at Amy's face. For a moment, nothing happened. Amy continued to circle, her hissing and giggling growing louder. The collector's chanting intensified. Then I saw it. A flicker of something in Amy's eyes. A flicker of recognition, of fear, of her. The smile faltered, just for a split second. "Amy!" I shouted, my voice desperate. "Fight it. I know you're in there." The entity shrieked, a sound that ripped through the night, silencing the forest. It lunged at me, the glass shard aimed at my heart. But the circle held. She crashed against an invisible barrier, rebounding with a sickening thud. She clawed at the air, her fingers leaving glowing trails where they touched the protective boundary. The collector raised his voice, his chanting now a roar. The lantern light flared, illuminating the clearing in a blinding flash. I held the mirror steady, focusing all my will, all my love for Amy, into that single point of reflection. I saw her face in the mirror, superimposed over the monstrous visage of the entity. "Amy, I love you," I cried out. "Come back to me." The entity screamed again, a sound of pure agony. Its form flickered, wavered like a flame in a strong wind. Amy's face, her real face, became clearer in the mirror, her eyes filled with tears. And then, with a final deafening shriek, the entity shattered. The light from the lantern returned to normal. The chanting stopped. The forest was silent, except for the sound of my own ragged breathing. Amy collapsed to the ground, unconscious, but breathing. The glass shard lay beside her, harmless now. Her face, though pale and streaked with blood and dirt, was hers again. I rushed out of the circle, ignoring the tingling sensation as I crossed the boundary, and knelt beside her. I gently lifted her head, cradling her in my arms. "Amy?" I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open. They were brown again, clear and filled with a familiar warmth. She looked at me, confused, disoriented. "Tom," she whispered, her voice weak. What happened?" Tears streamed down my face. I couldn't speak. I just held her close, burying my face in her hair, breathing in the scent of her, no longer tainted by rot. The collector approached, his face unreadable. He knelt beside us and examined Amy, his touch gentle. "She's free," he said, his voice quiet. "The connection is broken." He stood up and looked at me, his eyes filled with a weary understanding. "The shadows are always out there," he said. "Waiting, but you have shown them that love is a stronger force." He turned and walked back into the forest, disappearing into the darkness as silently as he had appeared. I stayed there, holding Amy, until the first rays of dawn broke through the trees. I carried her back to the car, back to the world, back to our life. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be therapy, explanations, and a long, slow process of healing. But we were together. And that, I knew, was all that mattered. The shadows had been banished, for now. But I would never forget the lesson I had learned. That even in the darkest of nights, love and the will to fight for it could be a light strong enough to guide us home.